I can still remember the exact moment when my world collapsed around me. It wasn't a sudden explosion, not a dramatic confrontation. No raised voices, no desperate pleas, just the cold, calculated efficiency of someone who had emotionally checked out long before they decided to walk away. The sound of a suitcase zipper broke the suffocating silence. The metallic clink of expensive jewelry being packed away, the sharp scent of her designer perfume still hanging in the air, once intoxicating, now suffocating. The room we had once filled with laughter, whispers, and late-night confessions had turned into nothing more than a space for a final transaction, where I was left bankrupt, emotionally overdrawn. Scarlett was leaving me. Her hands moved with detached precision, folding clothes I had once peeled off her with love and devotion. Now, she packed them like she was boxing up the last remnants of a life she had outgrown. No hesitation, no second-guessing, just ruthless, emotionless efficiency. "Logan, this isn't working anymore." Her voice was clipped, devoid of the warmth I had once worshipped. A statement, not an invitation for discussion. A verdict, not a plea for understanding. I swallowed hard, my jaw tightening. I tried to find the right words, but my mind was a chaotic mess, a whirlwind of confusion, rage, and heartbreak. This woman, the same woman who had once clung to me in the dead of night, swearing that I was her home, was leaving, not because I had cheated, not because I had hurt her, but because I wasn't enough, because her family told her so. I should have seen it coming. Maybe I did. Maybe I just didn't want to believe that the woman I loved could be so easily manipulated by Eleanor Hargrove, the matriarch of the Hargrove dynasty, a woman who wielded power like a weapon, whose mere presence could make the strongest men feel small. She stood by the doorway, arms crossed over her expensive silk blouse, watching the spectacle unfold with a thin, satisfied smirk. "You should have known better, Logan." Vivian's voice dripped with amusement, her condescension as refined as her designer heels. "Did you really think this could last? That she would stay with someone who has nothing?" That word, nothing. It cut deeper than I expected. My fists clenched at my sides. "I'm not nothing," I said through gritted teeth. She tilted her head, amused. "No wealth, no connections, no legacy." She gestured around the penthouse, as if dismissing it with a mere wave of her hand. This was temporary, a distraction for Scarlett. I turned to Scarlett, desperate for her to refute it, to fight, to prove that all of this, meant something to her. She flinched at her mother's words, but she didn't deny them. I stared at her, my heart pounding. "You don't really believe that, do you?" She hesitated. That hesitation was a blade to my chest, slow and merciless, because it meant she wasn't just leaving me. She was agreeing. "Logan, you don't understand," she murmured, rubbing her temples, like this was difficult for her, like she was the one being torn apart. "I can't fight them anymore." "Fight them?" I let out a hollow laugh. "Did you ever even try?" Her silence was answer enough. I shook my head, stepping closer, voice raw. "We made vows, Scarlett. We built a life. We fought for this. And now, because your mother thinks I'm not good enough, you throw it all away." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. She just closed her eyes for a second before exhaling sharply. "You don't belong in my world, Logan. You never did." The words landed like a sledgehammer to the ribs. I let out a hollow chuckle. "Wow." Just like that. She folded her arms across her chest like a shield. "It's not just me, Logan. It's my father, my brother, everyone. They'll never accept you. And she bit her lip before whispering, "I can't fight them anymore." That was the final nail in the coffin. I stared at the woman I once thought would stand by me through everything, and suddenly I saw her for what she really was. Someone who had never been willing to fight for me at all. Vivian took a step forward, victorious, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "You should leave now, Logan. Scarlett has made her decision." I turned to my wife one last time. "One last chance. Tell me you don't love me anymore," I said, my voice low, daring her. She swallowed hard. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. That's what I thought. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. And then, finally, she whispered, "It's not about love. It's about reality." Her reality was wealth, power, and privilege. My reality? Hard work, late nights, and a naive belief that love could bridge the gap between our worlds. I reached into my pocket, curling my fingers around the weight of my wedding ring. It felt heavier than ever, like it had absorbed all my shattered expectations. Slowly, deliberately, I pulled it off and placed it on the marble counter. The sound of metal meeting stone echoed through the room. "I hope it was worth it," I said, my voice eerily calm. Scarlett's eyes flickered with something: regret, sadness, guilt. But it was too late. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked past Vivian, not sparing her another glance. Her suffocating perfume filled my nostrils, but all I could smell was betrayal. "Goodbye, Logan," Scarlett called softly as I reached the door. I didn't look back. I stepped out of that penthouse into the cold night air and stood there for a long moment, just breathing. I had entered that building as a husband, a believer, a fool. I was leaving as a man who had lost everything. And yet, beneath the heartbreak and humiliation, something else stirred in my chest. A dangerous, burning ember. A promise. One day, I would be the man they regretted losing. One day, my name would be spoken with admiration, with respect. One day, I wouldn't need revenge. I would simply win. The world outside felt different as I stepped into the night. The cold air hit my face like a slap, a sharp contrast to the stifling way of the penthouse I had just walked out of. The city lights that once felt full of opportunity and endless ambition now seemed distant, indifferent, mocking me in their relentless glow. I didn't know where to go. No plan. No backup. No home. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there, couldn't let them see me crumble. So I walked, block after block, past sleek high-rise buildings where men in tailored suits shook hands over multi-million-dollar deals, past luxury storefronts that I had once walked into with Scarlett, past restaurants where we had spent nights laughing over overpriced wine. Every step was a reminder how much I had lost, how easily I had been erased from a world I had fought so hard to belong to. I stopped at a crosswalk, staring at my reflection in the glass window of a darkened cafe. I barely recognized the man staring back. Hollow eyes, clenched jaw, a shadow of the person I used to be. The weight of everything settled on my chest like a boulder. I was homeless in every sense of the word, not just without a roof over my head, but stripped of my identity, my purpose, my pride. With nowhere else to turn, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one name I could call, one person who might still have my back. I hit dial and listened to the ring, my breath held tight in my chest. "Yeah." A groggy voice answered after the fourth ring. "It's Logan." A pause, then a sigh. "Jesus, man. What happened?" "Scarlett's gone." My voice came out raw, uneven. Another pause. Then, "Where are you?" I swallowed. "I don't know." "Come to my place." The line went dead, and for the first time in hours, I felt something other than despair. Relief, maybe, or just the faintest flicker of hope that I wasn't completely alone. I hailed a cab with the last cash I had in my wallet and gave the driver the address to Carter's apartment, an old buddy from college who had seen me at my worst before. If anyone would let me crash without asking too many questions, it was him. When I arrived, Carter was waiting at the door, leaning against a frame with a beer in his hand, and a look that said he already knew how bad things were. "Jesus, Logan, you look like shit." "Feel like it too," I muttered, stepping inside. His place was a mess. Empty takeout containers, unfolded laundry, a couch that had definitely seen better days. But right then, it was a palace compared to the streets. Carter handed me a beer, nodding toward the couch. "So, she finally did it, huh?" I lowered myself onto the worn cushions, exhaling slowly. "Yeah." He let out a low whistle. "Knew it was coming. You were playing house with a girl whose family thinks people like us are background characters." I clenched my jaw, but I didn't argue, because he was right. Thought love mattered more than money. I muttered. Carter barked a bitter laugh. "Love's a luxury, man. Rich people can afford it because they don't have anything else to worry about. Us, we're too busy surviving. And that was the truth that hit me the hardest. I had spent years convincing myself that love could bridge the gap between our worlds. But I was wrong. For the next few days, I crashed at Carter's, sleeping on his lumpy couch, waking up to the sound of his morning routine. TV blaring, coffee burning, his dog barking at nothing. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than waking up in an alley somewhere. I sent out job applications during the day, emails to old contacts, desperate for anything to keep me afloat. But the responses, when they came, were always the same, either polite rejections or complete silence. It didn't take long to realize why. The Hargroves had blacklisted me. Every door I knocked on, every opportunity one reached for, had been shut before I even got close. No one in the industry wanted to touch me. I had gone from a promising executive to a nobody overnight, erased like I had never existed. I came back to Carter's place one evening, exhausted, defeated, gripping a six-pack of cheap beer. I found him on the couch, flipping through channels with disinterest. He glanced up. Any luck? I cracked open a beer and took a long, slow sip before answering. They blacklisted me. Carter sat up. What? The Hargroves. They made sure I'll never work in finance again. I'm toxic. He exhaled sharply. Damn. Yeah, damn. For a while, we just sat there in silence, the weight of it settling between us. Then, finally, Carter turned to me with a look I recognized, one of reckless determination. So what now? He asked. I stared at the bottle in my hands, turning it slowly between my fingers. That was the question, wasn't it? What now? I had spent the past few weeks playing defense, licking my wounds, waiting for someone to throw me a lifeline, but no one was coming to save me. Slowly, I leaned forward, my grip tightening around the glass. I have an idea, I said. Carter raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. A slow, determined smile crept across my lips. It is because that night something shifted. I stopped thinking like a man who had lost everything and started thinking like a man with nothing left to lose. The Hargroves thought they had buried me, but they didn't realize I was the kind of man who thrived in the dark. Because when you have nothing left, the only direction to go is up, and I was about to make a comeback they'd never see coming. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was drowning in the usual storm of bitterness and regret, but because, for the first time since Scarlett had walked out of my life, I felt something different, a shift, a fire rekindling inside me. The suffocating weight of loss had been replaced with something else, determination, anger, hunger. If the Hargroves thought they had erased me, if they thought they could reduce me to a footnote in their pristine world, they were about to learn that I wasn't the kind of man who stayed buried. I wasn't a casualty. I was the storm they never saw coming. By the time the sun broke over the city skyline, I had made my decision. No more waiting for doors to open. No more playing by their rules. I would build something from nothing, carve my name into the foundation of an empire that would make them choke on their arrogance. Carter stumbled into the kitchen around noon, rubbing his face with one hand, the other already reaching for the half-empty coffee pot. His eyes flicked to me, still sitting at the small table, papers, notes, and my laptop spread out in front of me like a war map. "You didn't sleep," he muttered, stating the obvious as he poured himself a cup. "No." He took a slow sip, watching me over the rim. "That look in your eye is either genius or suicide." "Maybe both," I admitted, pushing a notebook toward him. "I'm starting a company." Carter blinked at me. Then he barked a laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah? With what money? You got a stash of gold bricks hidden somewhere." "I have a plan," I countered, unwavering. "And I'm done playing it safe." I spent the next 2 hours outlining everything. How I would build a company from the ground up, what industry I'd break into, who my competitors were, and most importantly, how I'd make sure the Hargroves couldn't touch me. Carter listened, occasionally throwing out cynical remarks, but as the minutes passed, I saw the shift in his expression. He knew me well enough to understand that this wasn't some pipe dream. This was a declaration of war. "I'm in," He finally said, setting his empty mug down with a thud. But if we're doing this, we do it right. No shortcuts. No half measures. No half measures, I echoed, sealing the pact. Starting from nothing meant scraping together resources wherever I could find them. It meant pulling favors, leveraging old connections that hadn't yet turned their backs on me. It meant sleepless nights, endless research, and an unrelenting drive to push forward, even when the odds were stacked against me. Carter and I worked out his cramped apartment, transforming his tiny living room into our unofficial headquarters. Every inch of space was covered in charts, notes, and blueprints of what would eventually become our company, Sentinel Analytics, a name that would one day be synonymous with power, efficiency, and disruption. At first, no one took us seriously. We were just two nobodies trying to claw our way into a world that had already written us off. But I knew how to sell an idea, and I knew that desperation breeds innovation. The Hargroves had closed every door in my face, so I started building my own doors. Instead of going after the same old finance firms that had turned their backs on me, I set my sights on the small businesses, the startups, the underdogs, people who, like me, had been shut out by the elite. The first few months were brutal. Carter and I barely scraped by, pouring every dollar we had into development, marketing, and networking. There were nights we went without eating, days we worked without sleep. But I refused to quit. Every rejection fueled me. Every closed door only made me hungrier. And then, finally, the breakthrough came. A mid-sized logistics company, struggling with outdated financial tracking systems, agreed to test our software. If it worked, if we delivered on everything we promised, they'd sign a long-term contract. It wasn't a massive deal, but it was enough to prove we were worth betting on. We worked around the clock, refining our system, ensuring every feature ran flawlessly. When the company's CFO called me a week later, his voice laced with something I hadn't heard in months. Respect. I knew he had done it. "You've got yourself a deal," he said. 6-month trial. "If you keep performing, we'll talk expansion." It was just the beginning, but in that moment, it felt like the tide had finally started to turn. With our first contract secured, word began to spread. One company led to another, and soon we were fielding calls from investors who had once ignored me. The same people who had turned their backs when Hargrove shut me out were now interested in what I had built. I played the game carefully. I didn't let on how badly I needed funding. Didn't show my cards too soon. Instead, I made them come to me. I made them chase me. Carter and I worked like men possessed. We expanded Sentinel Analytics, hiring a small but elite team of developers and strategists. We secured a second round of funding, then a third. Within a year, we weren't just surviving, we were thriving. And that's when I saw the name that made my blood run hot. Eleanor Hargrove, the woman who had orchestrated my downfall, the matriarch of the family that had blacklisted me, was attending an exclusive industry gala. A gala where Sentinel Analytics had just been invited to present as one of the most promising up-and-coming firms in tech-driven finance. I sat back in my chair, staring at the invitation in my hands. Carter watched me carefully, waiting for my reaction. "You know what this means, right?" he said slowly. I met his gaze, a slow smile curling my lips. "Yeah, it means they can't ignore me anymore." The night of the gala, I stepped into the ballroom dressed in a tailored suit, my confidence unshakable. I wasn't just another guest. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be seen. As I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries with industry leaders, I felt eyes on me, watching, measuring, judging. And then, across the room, I saw her. Eleanor Hargrove stood beside a group of executives, her expression unreadable, but I caught the flicker of recognition, the subtle tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes narrowed just slightly as she registered my presence. I didn't look away, didn't flinch. I walked straight toward her. She held her ground, her grip tightening around the champagne flute in her hand. When I finally stopped in front of her, she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Logan," she said smoothly, like she wasn't surprised to see me, like she hadn't tried to erase me from this world. "It's been a while." I smiled back, slow and deliberate. "It has." She tilted her head slightly. I hear you've been making quite the name for yourself. I let the silence stretch just long enough before replying. Not just a name, Eleanor, an empire. Her eyes darkened for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to see it. And that's when I knew I had won the first battle. But the war was just beginning. The moment I walked away from Eleanor Hargrove that night, I knew something fundamental had shifted. The balance of power, the silent war that had been waged against me, had begun to tilt. I wasn't just another name in a sea of ambitious entrepreneurs anymore. I was a name they whispered about, the name they couldn't ignore, the name that had defied them. But I also knew that standing on the battlefield meant I had declared war, and Eleanor Hargrove was not the kind of woman to let that go unanswered. The next morning, Sentinel Analytics was all over the news. Articles praised our disruptive technology, our meteoric rise, and most importantly, my resilience in the face of adversity. I had expected media attention, but not on this level. Someone, whether an ally or an enemy, had fed the journalists exactly the kind of story they wanted. The man who had been blacklisted by the Hargrove dynasty was now building an empire they could no longer control. I stared at the headlines, my coffee growing cold on my desk. Carter, pacing behind me, let out a low whistle as he scrolled through his phone. "They're eating this up," he muttered. "This isn't just a business story anymore. This is personal. The underdog who came back to haunt them." I exhaled slowly, setting the paper down. That's exactly what worries me. Carter glanced up. "Why? This is what we wanted. You wanted them to see you. You wanted them to know they lost." "I wanted to win, Carter." I corrected, my voice calm but firm. "But I also know that people like Eleanor Hargrove don't lose. They just regroup and strike back harder." And I was right. The first sign came in the form of an unexpected phone call from a major investor we had been in talks with for months. Just a night before, they had been enthusiastic, eager to discuss expansion opportunities. This morning, their tone had changed. "I'm sorry, Logan." The voice on the other end of the line said, "Too smooth, too rehearsed. After careful consideration, we've decided to hold off on any further commitments with Sentinel Analytics. It's nothing personal, just a shift in our portfolio strategy." Bullshit. Carter was watching me, his expression tight as I ended the call. I didn't need to say a word. He already knew. "They're pulling strings," he muttered, "trying to cut off your funding." I nodded, setting my phone down, my mind already racing through our next steps. She's not going to stop at investors. She's going to go after clients, our reputation, anything she can tarnish. And sure enough, within the next 48 hours, the attacks started rolling in. Anonymous reports questioning the security of our software. False claims about unethical business practices. Rumors that we were a sinking ship, that we were stretched too thin, that Sentinel Analytics was a risky bet. The old me might have panicked. The old me might have scrambled to do damage control, to play defense, to try and salvage what I could. But I wasn't that man anymore. "Let them come," I told Carter, my voice steady, my hands already drafting our next move. "They think they can squeeze me out of this industry? Fine, but they forgot one thing." Carter raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" I leaned back in my chair, a slow, knowing smile forming. "I don't need their industry anymore. I'm going to build my own. If the Hargroves wanted to shut us out of their world, then I would create a new one where their influence meant nothing, one where their old money tactics had no power. Sentinel Analytics wasn't just going to be another tech firm fighting for scraps in a world dominated by the elite. It was going to be a movement. I pivoted. Instead of chasing traditional investors, I went straight to the real power in business. The ones who were just as hungry as I was. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, independent investors who had been shut out by the old guard. People who didn't care about pedigree or legacy, only results. Within weeks, Sentinel Analytics became a rallying point for the underdogs. The narrative shifted. No longer was I just a man who defied the Hargroves. I was a man leading a revolution against them. And Eleanor Hargrove? She had made one critical mistake. She thought this was about business. But this was never just about money. This was about power, influence, control, and I was about to take all three. The final blow came at an event Eleanor herself had orchestrated, a lavish business summit meant to showcase the strength and dominance of the Hargrove empire. The guest list was exclusive, the stakes high, but what Eleanor hadn't counted on was that Sentinel Analytics had become too big, too loud, too impossible to ignore. So they had no choice but to invite me. The night of the summit, I walked into the Grand Hargrove Hall not as an outsider, not as the man they had once cast aside, but as an equal. No, more than an equal. As a force they could no longer control. Eleanor was waiting for me near the center of the ballroom, her expression poised, unreadable. But I saw it. The flicker of unease, the slightest tension in her shoulders. Because she knew, just as well as I did, that this was a moment everything changed. "Logan," she greeted smoothly, offering a cool smile. "You've certainly been making waves." I met her gaze head-on, my own smile slow, deliberate. "Not waves, Eleanor. Tides." She chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Bold words for someone still fighting to stay in the game. I tilted my head slightly. "You're mistaken." Her lips parted slightly, a flicker of confusion passing over her face. "Oh." I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough that only she could hear. "I'm not fighting to stay in the game. I've already won." And then I walked away, leaving her standing there, for the first time in her life, without a single move left to play. By the time the Hargroves realized what had happened, it was too late. Sentinel Analytics wasn't just another company. It was an institution, a powerhouse built on the very foundation they had tried to bury me under. Every attempt to sabotage me had only made me stronger. Every door they closed had forced me to build a new one, until finally I had something they could never take away. Scarlett called me once, a weak attempt to reconnect, to see if there was still a part of me that longed for the life we had before. I didn't answer, because that version of me, the man who had once begged for their approval, their acceptance, their validation, he was gone, and in his place stood the man they could never break, the man who had won. As the world watched the fall of the Hargroves hold over the industry, I found myself standing at the peak of everything I had fought for. The empire I had built was no longer just a startup clawing for relevance. It was a force, an entity that dictated the direction of the market, a brand synonymous with innovation and resilience. Sentinel Analytics wasn't just my revenge. It was my legacy, my proof that the ones who tried to bury me had only made me stronger. But there was one last thing left to do. The media had played its part in my rise, and now they would play their role in the Hargrove's final downfall. Every scandal they had swept under the rug, every unethical move they had made, every deal they had manipulated was about to be exposed. Not by whispers, not by lawsuits they could settle in silence, but by me in full daylight, with the entire industry watching. I arranged an exclusive interview with one of the most respected financial journalists in the country, a full expose on the tactics the Hargroves had used to maintain their dominance, the ways they had crippled competition, the lives they had destroyed along the way. I provided evidence, emails, contracts, testimonies from those they had silenced. And then, just days before the interview was set to air, my assistant walked into my office, her face pale. "Sir," Olivia said, holding out her phone, "it's Eleanor Hargrove. She wants to meet." I took the phone and looked at the number flashing on the screen. After all these years, after every move she had made against me, Eleanor Hargrove had finally come to the realization that there was no more fight left for her to win. I exhaled and answered, "Eleanor." There was silence on the line for a moment, then her voice, still carrying that edge of control, but weaker now, forced into negotiation. "Logan, let's talk." I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile forming. "I think we're past that point, don't you?" She sighed. "You've made your point. But this war doesn't benefit either of us anymore. There's another way forward." I let that hang in the air. Another way forward. She had spent years shutting doors in my face, cutting me off from my own future, ensuring I had no foothold in her world. And now, when she saw the inevitable, when she realized I had built something she could never destroy, she was suddenly open to discussion. "Eleanor," I said smoothly, "you're assuming I need a way forward with you. But here's the truth. You have nothing I want anymore. Her breath hitched slightly, barely audible, but I heard it. The moment of realization. The moment she understood that she had lost completely. This doesn't have an end in destruction, she said, voice softer now, almost pleading. Oh, but it does, I replied. Because the difference between you and me is that I don't erase people when they stand in my way. I just show them how irrelevant they become. She was silent. No counter. No clever retort. Enjoy the show, Eleanor, I said before hanging up. The interview aired 3 nights later, and the fallout was exactly what I had envisioned. The Hargrove name, once untouchable, was now plastered across every financial news outlet in the country, not as industry leaders, but as relics of corruption and greed. Investors abandoned them. Their stock plummeted. Clients severed ties. Eleanor disappeared from the public eye, retreating into shadows like a defeated queen stripped of her kingdom. And me? I stood atop the empire I had built, stronger than ever, no longer needing revenge, no longer looking back. Because the future belonged to me now. Scarlett reached out one last time, a desperate message sent late at night. I was wrong. I see that now. Can we talk? I stared at the text for exactly 5 seconds before deleting it without a reply. No anger. No second thoughts. Because some things aren't worth revisiting. And some people aren't worth saving. I had become the man they never saw coming. And I was just getting started.